Dear friends, welcome to EPG Pathshala. I am Dr. Nitesh Goyal from DAV College, Chandigarh. I am going to present before you the 22nd module titled Measurement and Scaling Techniques under the paper Tourism and Hospitality Research. The module will cover the following topics: the introduction, the measurement, the scaling, the characteristics of scale, types of scales or measurement, the scaling techniques, characteristics of good measurement, and finally the summary. Dear friends, after the completion of this module, you will be able to understand the meaning and levels of measurement. You will be able to understand different scales for measurement. So friends, first of all, I would like to give you a brief introduction about the topic. Tourism research can be defined as probing the existing business facts so as to make better decisions in future. Some of the definitions that are given are as follows. Research is to study the figures of the past and present, and from them to draw just inferences as to the probable future. The definition is given by Leonard Ayres in the year 1922. Tourism research as a process does not go by intuition. A proper methodology is followed by the researcher, in which the researcher uses the knowledge and evidence to get to the conclusions and generate new knowledge. Researching helps in identifying the various problems and opportunities surrounding a business, providing information for the same, and hence decreasing the risk of taking a wrong decision. In order to define the research problem, following steps should be undertaken by a researcher. Step 1. Assess the background and the manager's situation. It is important for the researcher to develop an understanding of the industry, its competitors, and the company before embarking on the research. In tourism research, understanding the dynamics of the industry is of utmost importance before a researcher can define the problem. Majority of the failed research can be traced back to a researcher not understanding the background or the situation and therefore ill-defining the problem. The researcher must understand first what is the objective of the practitioner. Research is of no use if it does not solve a practitioner's problem. Therefore, it is very important for a researcher to understand the objective of the practitioner. Secondly, what are the constraints which the practitioner is working under? No practitioner ever works with unlimited resources. It is only the needs which are unlimited. Therefore, it is very important for a researcher to develop an understanding of these constraints before embarking on the research. This understanding will help a researcher develop solutions which are practically applicable. Under the step 2, clarify the symptoms of the problem. Many a times a research fails because the researcher is unable to understand and differentiate them terms from the problem. Concentrating the research on the symptoms will lead to temporary solutions to the problem. However, in order to find the permanent solutions, the researcher should clarify the symptoms and the problem. Step 3. Pinpoint the suspected cause of the symptom. One of the ways in which a researcher can clarify the symptoms and the problems is by tracing the causes of the symptom. This is done by asking the question why. That is, why do the symptoms exist? This usually helps in pinpointing the causes of the symptom. Step 4. Specify possible and to speculate on anticipated consequences of the solutions. It's important for the researcher to do an analysis of possible solutions. That is, a what if analysis to the situation. This analysis helps a researcher to define the premise of the problem. Step 5. Identify the manager's assumption about the solution's consequences. Step 6. Assess the adequacy of information on hand. To specify research objectives, it is important for a researcher to assess the quality and the quantity of the information available. It is the gaps and discrepancy in the existing information which helps a researcher identify the research problem. Once the research problem has been formulated, a multi-stage research process is undertaken by the researcher so as to solve the problem. After defining the research problem, a review of literature followed by hypothesis formulation is done. Hypothesis formulation leads to stages of research design, data collection, data analysis, and report presentation. Once the research design has been finalized, the researcher moves to the next stage of deciding on the measurement and scaling procedures. In this lesson, attempt is made to discuss the fundamental characteristics of the measurement and scaling. First of all, we take the measurement. Measurement refers to the process of assigning numbers or symbols to the characteristics of the variable according to some predefined rules and norms. It is very important for the students to understand that the measurement is done for a particular characteristic of the variable. For example, we do not measure consumers but assign numbers to the characteristics of consumers, which may be perception, attitudes, satisfaction, or preferences. In tourism research, measurement is done for following reasons. First, quantifying the characteristics that helps the researcher do statistical analysis even on the psychological characteristics like satisfaction. Number 2, the process of assigning numbers also helps in communication of measurement rules and results. Measurement has been defined as the correlation with the number of entities which are not closed. For example, he had 8 hours of sleep is less infrequently used as compared to he had a good sleep or the cake is too sweet. Therefore, the statement of the decision, particularly research questions and various research hypotheses which can be used to decide what concept a researcher need to be measured in the project. Measurement is the process of describing some property of phenomena of a interest, usually by assigning numbers in a reliable and valid way. The numerical value describes the information about the thing or properties to be measured. Whenever numerics are used, a researcher must have proper rules and regulations for assigning a numerical value to an observation in a way to provide an accurate description. As a researcher, you do not measure objects, but you measure attributes related to objects. Similarly, a researcher measures the sales of the company. Sales are the attributes of the object, that is the company. Measurement can be clearly defined by properly understanding the way in which an instructor assigns grades to the students. Performance of the student in the class is represented by the grades. Students with higher performance should receive a different grade than students with lower performance. Hence, simple concepts like grading of student can be done in many different ways. Therefore, measurement is the process where the researcher for a predefined research problem observes and records the observations. There are two aspects of measurement that the researcher has to consider. First, the level of measurement. The levels of measurement refers to four basic types of measurement or scaling, that is nominal, ordinal, interval and ratio. Second is the types of measures. In types of measures, we understand the different types of measures that can be used in social research, especially in tourism research. There are four broad types of measures. First, the survey research. This category of measurement reference to design and implementation of interviews and questionnaires. This refers to instrumentation for measurement. Second, the scaling. This involves measuring on a continuum. This method of measurement has been discussed in detail in this lesson. Third, the qualitative research. This refers to an approach of measurement where non-numerical measurement techniques are used. Fourth, unobtrusive measures. This type of measurement refers to methods which do not intrude with the context of search. Now we have the next topic, that is scaling. Scaling is an extension of the concept of measurement. Scaling involves following a process to measure the characteristics of a variable on a continuum and relativity. For example, in order to measure perception of tourists towards a destination, a scale of 1 to 5 could be used, where each number indicates the degree of unfavorableness to the destination, with 1 is equal to extremely unfavorable to 5 is equal to extremely favorable. Thus, the scaling helps in first reflecting the relationship between the objects with respect to the characteristics involved. Also, it allows the investigator to make comparison of the amount and change in the property being measured. Therefore, scaling refers to a procedure of assigning numbers to the characteristics like opinions, attitudes, etc. Scaling refers to a process of assigning numbers on a continuum. The continuum is hence constructed so that it has a highest point and the lowest point with some intermediate values. It is important to note here that the process of assigning numbers is referred to as scaling. However, the continuum itself is referred to as scale. These scales are described in terms of four basic characteristics. There are four basic characteristics which determine the level of measurement or scale. First, the description. This particular characteristic refers to a unique label which is used to designate each value of the scale. Irrespective of the level of the measurement, every scale possesses the characteristic of description. For example, 1 may be female and 2 may be male. Therefore, it is very important for every scale to have unique descriptors and response options. Second, order. This characteristic refers to relative positions of the descriptors. Order refers to relative positioning of the response of the respondents. For example, a scale could be constructed so that one response is greater than or less than the other one. Therefore, if a scale has an order of the respondent could express their preference for a destination in terms of most preferred to being the least preferred. Third, the distance. This particular characteristic of a scale refers to absolute differences between 2 points of measures within the scheme. For example, a family with 5 members can be said to have 1 member more than a 4-member family. Similarly, a person with 5-point satisfaction from a destination could be said to have more satisfaction than a person with 4-point satisfaction. Therefore, distance implies order but not vice versa. The fourth is the origin. This particular characteristic of the scale refers to a scale having true 0 point. An answer of 0 would mean that the respondent has no measurement of that particular vehicle. In social sciences, this point is referred to as neutral. It is these characteristics which are used in order to determine the level of measurement. The level of measurement gets more sophisticated as the number of characteristics possessed in a particular scale increase. Therefore, description, order, distance and origin successively present higher level of characteristics. In this order, origin is the highest characteristic of Kate and possess. It is important to note here that if a scale has origin, it is a must that it will have all the lower levels of characteristic, that is description, order and distance. Friends, now we take on the types of scales or measurement. As discussed before, there are 2 types of measurement, that is types of measures and levels of measures. The types of measures or scales are determined by the presence of 4 characteristics discussed in the previous section. Based on the presence of the above characteristics, there are 4 basic types of scales. These are nominal, ordinal, interval and ratio. The richness of the scale depends upon the number of characteristics the scale possesses. It is the objective of the measurement which determines the type of scale which should be used in research. Nominal scales first. This category of scales refer to the most elementary and the basic scales of the 4. This is a level of measurement which assigns only a value to an object for identification and classification purpose. This is the type of scale which possesses the characteristics of description. This type of scale means that a label can be assigned to an object without any error. This type of scale only allows most basic of the statistical analysis to the object. For example, gender can be grouped into 2 categories, one being male and 2 being female. Other examples of nominal scale can be social security numbers, Aadhaar card numbers, insurance policy numbers, etc. It is important to note that in a nominal scale there is one-to-one correspondence between the numbers and the object. That is, one number can be assigned only once to an object. Second scale is the ordinal scale. This category of scale refers to a scale which has not only the characteristic of description but also the characteristic of order. Therefore, ordinal scales are ranking scales and they rank order the categories in a meaningful way. Ordinal scales indicate the relativity. This refers to the extent to which the object possesses some characteristic. Therefore, an ordinal scale indicates the relative position of an object. The object ranked first has more of the characteristics being measured as compared to the object being ranked second and henceforth. For example, quality rankings, sportsman rankings, company rankings, etc. When measured on this type of scale, the responses carry the characteristic of greater than or less than. In this kind of scales, percentile, median and percentages can be calculated on the objects being measured. The third scale is the interval scale. Interval scales are the scales which have characteristics of both nominal and the ordinal scale. That is, in addition to description and order, the scale also possesses the characteristics of distance. Interval scales also capture the information about their friends in the characteristic of the object being measured. The difference between two scale values is identical to difference between two adjacent values in an interval scale. That is, the difference between 1 and 2 is same as the difference between 2 and 3. Therefore, this kind of scale allows us to measure the mean and standard deviation for the object being measured. As a result, these kind of scales lend themselves to a wide variety of statistical analysis as compared to nominal and ordinal scales. For example, if a professor evaluates term papers and assign marks ranging from 1.0 to 20.0, the scale represents that a student with 16 has outperformed a student whom the professor has assigned 12. Other examples of interval scale are temperature. The fourth scale is the ratio scale. A ratio scale represents a kind of scale which has properties of nominal, ordinal and interval scales. It has not only the characteristics of description, distance and order, but also the characteristic of origin. Therefore, a ratio scale can not only identify or classify objects into categories, it can also rank the objects and compare the intervals or differences. Ratio scales represent absolute meaning, whereas an interval scale represents relative meaning. In this kind of scale, the difference between 1 and 2 is same as difference between 3 and 4, but also 4 is larger than 2 in absolute sense. For example, height, weight, age, etc. are measured on ratio scales. Ratio scales lend themselves very well to geometric and harmonic means. Therefore, majority of statistical analysis can be applied on ratio scales. Now we come to the scaling techniques. Scaling techniques commonly employed in research can be classified into two categories. Number 1. Comparative scales. Comparative scales refer to set of scaling techniques which involves direct comparison between the objects being measured. The common techniques used in this category of scales are: first, the paired comparison. This kind of scale are the respondent to choose one of the responses on basis of some criteria. For example, which destination would a customer prefer, Jaipur or Goa? Second is the rank order. One of the most popular scaling techniques after the paired comparison is the rank order scaling. In this technique, a respondent is given a set of options and asked to order them in increasing or decreasing order. The third, the constant sum. In this technique, respondents are required to allocate a constant sum proportionately. For example, a customer might be asked to distribute 1000 rupees across 4 or 5 requirements that they have. Fourth, sort and other procedures. This is a technique which is used to discriminate between large number of objects being measured by a researcher. This particular technique helps the researcher achieve his objectives quickly. The second category of scales, non-comparative scales. Non-comparative scales and efforts to set of metric scales where each object is scaled independent of the other in the stimulus set. The common techniques used in this category are: first, the continuous rating scales. This is also known as graphic rating scale. In this scale, the respondents respond to measuring the object by placing a line on the continuum between two extremes. Second, the itemized rating scale like the Likert, semantic differential and the staple scales. In this kind of scale, the respondents are required to create their responses according to a predetermined criteria which is described to the respondent. For example, the Likert scale. This is one of the most widely used scales where the respondent answers to a particular characteristic of the object on a 5-point scale which represents a predetermined value. The next topic is the characteristic of good measurement. As discussed in the previous section of this lesson, there are two basic aspects of measurement, that is, the levels of measurement and the types of measurement. It is up to a researcher to choose the type of measure, that is, whether the nominal, the ordinal, the interval or the ratio scale. The choice is dependent on three aspects of measurement. These aspects of measurement are the reliability, validity and sensitivity. Now, what is reliability? This aspect refers to internal consistency of the scale. In order to check the responses of the respondent and to make sure that the answers of the respondents are trustworthy, researchers resort to a common tendency of asking multiple questions to measure an object. Though the researchers ask multiple questions, it is important to note that same questions are not asked. A measure is reliable when the responses of the respondents converge on the same result. The second is the validity. Validity refers to the amount of precision with which the responses measure the concept which the researcher wanted to measure. It simply refers to the fact that measurement of the object should be done very carefully to reflect that mentions of the object being measured. For example, if a researcher wants to measure performance of a hotel, then the measures being used should measure the performance of the hotel. These measures can vary from sales to profitability, but the basis for choice should be in review of literature. The third aspect is the sensitivity. It is the ability of a measurement instrument to measure variability in the object being measured. Limited the number of responses given to the respondents, lesser is the variability that the instrument is able to measure and hence less sensitive in the measurement scheme. Friends, let us now summarize the whole module. Measurement is defined as the process of assigning numbers to the object being measured. There are two aspects of measurement which have been discussed in the current lesson, that is, type of measurement and levels of measurement. There are various types of measurement techniques which can be used by the researchers. Scaling is one of such techniques discussed in this lesson. Levels of measurement refers to 4 types of measure which the researcher can use, that is, the nominal, the ordinal, the interval and the ratio scales. The difference between these 4 levels of measures is on the basis of 4 characteristics. that is the description, the distance, the order and the origin. The sophistication of the scale increases as you move from nominal to ratio scales. Ratio scales are the most sophisticated of all the 4 scales and lend themselves to a wide variety of statistical analysis because these possess all 4 characteristics, that is the description, the distance, the order and origin. Thank you.